Shalom, grace, and welcome to this week's edition of Penini Torah, Pearls of Torah with Yeshiva Shuvu. I'm Al-Tsur Cabeza Perez, and this week's Torah portion is Parashat Tzav, found in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 6. The focus that I would like to do in this week's study is what is the purpose of the sacrifices and how does that apply to us, those of us especially who follow Mashiach? How does this affect us and all of the people of Israel, being that there is no temple today to be found by which a high priest can perform acts of atonement through the sacrifices? So what do we do as believers to receive atonement? What do the children of Israel do in order to receive kaparah, the atonement for their sins? We have an interesting verse in chapter 6. Some versions may have it in verse 13, other versions may have it in verse 19, where we read the following. It says, "And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, This is the offering of Aharon and his sons, which they shall offer to Adonai, beginning on the day when he is anointed," the same root word as Mashiach, "1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a daily grain offering, half of it in the morning and half of it at night. It shall be made in a pan with oil. When it is mixed, you shall bring it in. The baked pieces of the grain offering you shall offer for a sweet aroma to Adonai." Now, if we analyze this text as it is written in the Hebrew, it says the following. "Ze korban Aharon ubanav asher yakrivu la'Adonai beyom himashach oto asirit ha'efa solet mincha tamid." And so Shnei Luchot Habrit makes the interesting understanding on this verse that this commandment is to ensure that the high priest prays for the whole community, all of whom depend on him to obtain forgiveness from Elohim. The high priest must concentrate on being the instrument of forgiveness for his people, to secure atonement for them, and to establish harmony between them and their Maker. In order to be able to secure forgiveness for others, he must first also secure forgiveness for his own sins. This is why he personally has to bring two such sacrifices daily. We derive this idea from the words, "Only a person who himself is ritually pure can perform the rite of sprinkling blood on the ritually impure to help him regain ritual purity," quoting from Numbers 19:19. In other words, the high priest himself had to provide his own atonement because of any sins that may have existed in him, causing him to be impure. And only then, as he is pure, will he be able to help those who are impure become pure again. Now, we have a parallel to this in the renewed covenant, in the epistle to the Ivrim, in the epistle to the Hebrews. We see in chapter 7, verse 26 through 27, the following. "For such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, set apart, harmless," meaning blameless, "undefiled, separate from sinners." Who are sinners? Those who transgress the Torah, those who are impure, "and has become higher than the heavens, who does not need daily, as the other high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the people's. For this he did once for all when he offered up himself." Now, in order for this to be established, the atonement once and for all made by the priest himself, this had to have been prophesied. And we find this prophecy in the book of Zechariah chapter 3, beginning in verse 9. It says the following. Beginning in verse 8. Hear, O Yehoshua, the high priest, you and your companions who sit before you, for they are a wondrous sign. For behold, I am bringing forth my servant, Eved, the branch, the tzemach, which is synonymous with the netzer. We know who this is. It's speaking of Mashiach. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Yehoshua, upon the stone are 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave its inscription, says Adonai of hosts. And I will remove the iniquity of the land in 1 day. In that day, says Adonai of hosts, everyone will invite his neighbor under his vine and under his fig tree. Remember, Yeshua the netzer, the branch, when was presented to the disciples in the book of Yochanan, in the book of John, was referred to as the Nazarene. And when one of the disciples doubted what good can come from Nazrat, from the city named after this branch, we see that the Messiah revealed to him that he saw him as he sat under the fig tree. And we researched what the sages had to say of the significance of the fig tree, referring to the Chidushei Torah, the renewals of Torah, or the secrets of Torah, which are none other than the revelations of Torah, which are provided through the Mashiach. And this is part of the prophecy of the renewed covenant, that the Torah, which would be written in our hearts and minds, would be internalized along with the revelations that only the Spirit of Messiah can give. And so, in order to fully understand this, we got to look back further in this chapter of Zechariah, chapter 3, beginning at verse 3, because in order for this to take place, this high priest, who happened to have the same name Yehoshua, of the same root name of Yeshua, he had to change his clothes. In verse 3 it says, Now Yehoshua was clothed with filthy garments, and was standing before the Malach, the angel of Adonai. Then he answered and spoke to those who stood before him, saying, Take away the filthy garments. And to him he said, See, I have removed your iniquity from you, and I will clothe you with rich robes. The filthy garments were associated with impurities. And so we see in our Parashat, in Vayikra, chapter 6, some versions have it in verse 4, some versions have it in verse 10, says the following. And the priest shall put on his linen garments, and his linen trousers he shall put on his body, and take up the ashes of the burnt offering, which the fire has consumed on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar. Now, referring to this verse, Tur HaAroch says the following. The Kohen, the priest, will divest himself of his clothes and shall don other garments. Nachmanides writes, Surely it is a duty for the priest not to wear the regular priestly garments while engaged in a task that would soil the garments, such as when he removes the ashes. We know that our Messiah, Yeshua, took upon the sins of the people of Israel, and not just the people of Israel, but of all the nations, in order to purify them, as was prophesied in Isaiah 53. And in the book of Hebrews 13:13, we are told that he had to go outside the gate. Tur HaAroch continues, There is an opinion according to which the word acherim, other, acher, the root word here, that we understood as alternate or other sacred garments, do not actually refer to inferior priestly garments, but to ordinary garments such as the ones worn by non-priests. In other words, as we see in the book of Philippians, the Messiah, who was to prophetically function as a high priest, was to divest himself of his glorious clothing, which reflected his innocence, his purity, his perfection in Torah, for he is the living Torah, and lowered himself for the sake of others, as that is the function of a high priest, to bring others near to the Creator. So what is the significance of this change of clothing. We see in the Zohar Parashat Pinchas the following explanation, bringing us back to Zechariah chapter 3. Look what is written. Now Yehoshua was clothed in filthy garments. The filthy garments were surely the garments in which the Spirit is attired in that world. Happy is the portion of he whose garments are fixed and complete in that world. The spirit trapped in a physical body that is sentenced to death in this world since the sin of Adam Harishon, the first man. It is a person's bad deeds that make the filthy garments for him. Lawlessness. And he said to him, behold, I have caused your iniquity to pass from you, and I clothe you in festive garments. Come and see the similarity. Pinchas, who did not leave this world until he had changed into other fitted garments. Remember, he was a high priest in his generation, which the Spirit would enjoy in the world to come. He had changed into other fitted garments, which the Spirit would enjoy in the world to come. Eternal life. Had at that same time taken off one set and put on another to fulfill that which is written. Behold, I give to him my covenant of shalom, referring to Bamidbar, Numbers 25:12. In other words, in order for this eternal life and this covenant of shalom to be given, there had to be a change of clothes. And as we see the clothes relate, as it says in the book of Revelation chapter 19, to either works of Torah, which are works of righteousness, or works of lawlessness, which is sin. And so, why is it significant for this change of clothes in order to receive the brit of shalom, the covenant of shalom? We see Rav Shaul explains to us in his epistle to the community in Rome, in chapter 8, verse 6, the following. For to be carnally minded, the mind of the flesh, for to be carnally minded is death. Think about this for a second. The mind of the flesh leads to death. But to be spiritually minded, to have the mind of the Spirit, is life and shalom. Life and peace. What life is he referring to? It must be the same eternal life that we just learned about in the Zohar. And for the confirmation, we have the confirmation in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 5, which says the following. He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of what? The book of life. The only way to receive this transition and change of clothing had to be from a different kind of high priest. For even the high priest that served according to the descendants of Aaron had to atone for themselves. There had to be one, as prophesied in the book of Zechariah, coming back to the prophecy in Bereshit 3:15, one who would stomp the head of the adversary and bring a tikkun, a rectification for the fallen nature of Adam and his descendants. And this is none other than Mashiach. So, why was it necessary for the animal sacrifices? We have this explanation again in the epistle to the Ivrim, in the epistle to the Hebrews, in chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. And this will be a key section in order to understand the following studies that we will do on the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Chapter 9, verse 13 and 14 says, for if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh. For the purifying of what? The flesh. So there was a purpose for the sacrifices. The purifying of the flesh. We see that Rav Shaul, who many accuse falsely of denying Torah, did a Nazirite vow, which consisted of sacrifices in the book of Acts after the revelation of Messiah Yeshua. It wasn't because of anything other than the sanctification of the flesh and its practical purposes that still had a function in this physical world. So what about the sacrifice of Mashiach? Verse 14 reveals to us specifically what the work of Messiah does. How much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit, the Spirit of eternal life, offered himself without spot to Elohim, he had no sin, cleanse your conscience from what? From dead works, lawlessness, works that are contrary to the Torah of Adonai. To do what? To serve the living Elohim. The atonement of Mashiach renews our minds, as is throughout the renewed covenant, Rav Shaul explains, for the renewing of our mind. We see an example of this in the book of Philippians, chapter 2, verse 5 through 7. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua, who being in the form of Elohim did not consider it robbery to be equal with Elohim, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a servant. He clothed himself in lower attire in order to bring us up to where we were meant to be. In the case of the high priest in our Parashat, in order to take the ashes and fulfill this particular function, he too had to divest himself of the priestly garments into regular garments in order to go outside the camp and to fulfill that necessary function. But in the case of Messiah, he does so in order for them and for us. And so we see in Kedushat Levi, a commentary on Bereshit, chapter 32, verse 28, a very interesting explanation referring to this renewal of the mind, the consciousness that is cleansed through Mashiach. What is the purpose of the consciousness? What is the need for the conscious to be cleansed? What does our mind, which our nefesh is attached to our mind, our soul is attached to our mind, what is this function? What needs to be rectified? What is it that the Messiah has done for us? And so we see in Kedushat Levi, it says, he said, your name will no longer be Yaakov, referring to Bereshit 32:28, but Israel. For you have contended both with celestial forces and with human forces, and you have prevailed. There are people who constantly remain attached to Elohim, even while they are engaged in conversation with other human beings. There are other people who, while engaged in a conscious effort to serve Adonai, concentrate on this to the exclusion of everything else. These people, while engaged in mundane activities, such as business conversations with their peers, cannot at the same time remain conscious of their duties toward their Creator. I'm going to take a pause from the commentary to explain. In other words, the great patriarchs, the men who have attained a spark of the Mashiach throughout the Torah and the prophets, were able to be in the spirit of Messiah and perform aspects of the functions of Messiah, which in part were the ability to deny the flesh and submit the conscience, the spirit, the soul to the celestial forces of Adonai in the heavens. In other words, denying the flesh and submitting to the spirit of Messiah, which was promised to them. Our patriarchs, the patriarchs of Am Yisrael, were able to do this in part in each generation. But there was one who was prophesied, the Messiah himself, who would embody this in one being, in one man, the Messiah, who had the divine being within him, who would be able to do this fully. And so it continues in the Midrash that this first type of person deserved the title Israel, as the letters Yashar, upright, as well as the letters of Rosh, head, we know who the head is, Mashiach, are part of that title. The second category of person is called Yaakov. Yaakov meaning that his attachment, ekev, to Elohim is secondary, just as a heel, the same root word of ekev, is a secondary and not a primary organ. Israel, the purpose of Israel, as we have discussed before, is to connect the heavenly realm of Adonai into our physical world, to reconnect this separation that took place at the fall of Adam Harishon, the first Adam. Now, this was prophesied to Yaakov when he saw the Sulam, this heavenly ladder, in Bereshit 28:12. Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua the Messiah, revealed to us that in the book of Yochanan, chapter 151, he is the Sulam Yaakov. He is the connector of the heavens and the earth. He is the high priest who goes into the original and the authentic tabernacle in the heavens that was made without hands. He himself being a tabernacle in this physical world. And so we see that in our parasha, in chapter 8, verse 23, it says the following. And Moses killed it, and also he took some of its blood and put it on the tip of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Now, Rabbeinu Bachya explains this as follows. The high priest embodied within himself the awareness of his creator and all the different divisions of the universe. It was important that this idea be given concrete expression in that his very body was treated as if it too consisted of three parts, each representing one part of the universe. Man himself may also be viewed as a microcosm of the universe. Further down, Rabbeinu Bachya explains that the purpose of the offering is the continued existence of the universe. A world which is divided into three parts. Remember, man has nefesh, the soul within the blood, the ruach, the spirit within us, and the neshama, the breath of life. Moses had to give some of the blood, which is the agent conferring the atonement, on the respective three parts of the priest, to ensure that all parts of the universe are recipients of the power of the sacrifice to bring about atonement. Without blood, there is no atonement. We see this further down in the book of Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11. We see specifically that this is explained to us in chapter 17, verse 11, which I'd like to read briefly, which we'll get to soon. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for your souls. There is no temple today. There has not been a temple since the days after the arrival of Yeshua HaNetzeri, Yeshua the Nazarene. Regardless what the nations of this world have done in falsely testifying about his teachings and the persecutions of his people, which was all prophesied, it does not change the fact that the temple is no longer here. What is it that sustains us to this day is the atonement that cleansed our minds and renewed our minds through the Messiah Yeshua. It is he alone who enables us to be recipients of this eternal life that had already been promised to the children of Israel. They were already in covenant, had already been in the walking of the ways of Adonai, observing his Torah, performing the sacrificial system, which did have a purpose for the purification of the flesh. But there was always a kavanah, an intention to believe and hope for the day of the final atonement, a day where there would be an atonement that would renew our minds in order to allow for the renewed covenant. The renewed covenant was not a new religion. The renewed covenant, what some call the New Testament, was not in order for a new book to replace the older books. Not at all. If we look into Jeremiah chapter 31, the renewed covenant is for what? For the Torah to be written in our hearts and our minds, to be renewed in the mind of the Spirit of the Messiah. There is no other way for atonement except through Yeshua. And if you have embraced Messiah, or if you are on the verge of embracing Messiah, please understand one thing, that his atonement was to renew your mind in order so that his Spirit can live in you and internalize his Torah. Yeshua also says that if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And if you understand the Messiah to be of the divine Spirit, then you understand that the same commandments that we understand within the Torah, what some call the Older Testament, were given by none other than Yeshua himself, because he was the one who appeared to Abraham, to Moshe, and to all of the patriarchs. And it is through him alone that we can truly walk in the ways of Torah. And we receive through him eternal life. Not because of our observance, but because of what he has done for us. And it is through him that we can live in appreciation and do as he commanded us to do. Do our good works in order to glorify the Father when others see it, bringing glory to his name in the name of Yeshua, as they see us walking in the Torah through the Spirit of love. And as they see us do this, then they will understand those around us, whether they be from the nations or whether they be from the people of Israel. They will know that he truly is the anointed one of the Creator, the living word of the Creator, for they are one. And we are one in him when we embrace his atonement and allow his Spirit to live out the Torah through us. Shavua Tov.